Hello everyone, this is GrindCore with part 7 of the Thin Red Grind. The video went on for a little bit too long, so I'll skip the intro and go right ahead to making straights. In this video I'm playing 6 tables of NL 400, and it's not a live session but a video review, because at NL 400 the regulars were putting me in tough spots where I really had to think, but I think faster than I can talk, so I was trying to narrate my thought processes in real time, but it was slowing me down, and yeah, it wasn't really beneficial to my play. So I decided to play to just record a video without having to talk live. And that also allows me to play more tables, because in a video review I can just pause and take my time to talk about a spot if needed, while in a live video new hands would be popping up. I'm playing the video at increased speed to get through the dead stretches faster, and I can pause at their interesting spots. If I miss a couple of hands, or if I don't comment on them because I just think they're pretty straightforward, but you do have questions about them, then just post it in the thread, and I'll answer your questions there. Just played a hand against this guy where I check called a flopped gut shot, and I went check on the turn, and I bet out on the river, and he ended up calling me. I bet half pot there, just to make him fold air essentially, not really expecting him to fold a bluff catcher, but maybe again maybe he would fold a bluff catcher, but just noting that he called, and also noting my my line there, my bet size. Yeah, taking that note now. Just gonna fast play the set multi-way here. Don't have reads on anyone, so not really much else to do. If I check here, I just risk him checking back something like pocket eights. And he might even check back a king. But he'll definitely call a king, and he'll probably call a triple barrel. On the heads up table I get check raised on the flop here. A lot of people, I think a lot of 6 max regulars in heads up kinda feel that they have to bluff because it's heads up, and they will like when the 6 max table breaks down, the regulars will very often 3-bet a ton and then quitting, and they'll also be quite bluffy post flop, just because it's heads up and they feel they have to play more aggro. So yeah, when he check raises the flop there, I think readless I would probably even float it with air. Kinda depends though. If it was a 6 max table breaking down, I might fold air, because even if he's bluffing, he's somewhat likely to continue on the turn. But since it's a table just starting up, he's not gonna make like a suicide bluff and then immediately quit afterwards. Just a minor thing. ATC stands for any 2 cards, because he showed down 6-3 offsuit. And also taking the note that he gave up on the the bad barreling card. So that means that he is capable of bluff check raising, but he will give up on bad cards, and that will allow me to both float him, but also to if I have a gut shot or something, or a draw, instead of getting it in on the flop, I can call him and then shove over his turn bet if it's a scare card, and maybe even call him down with a bluff catcher if the turn is a scare card. Here I called a 3-bet with queen jack from against a small blind, because he made it pretty small, and when people check an ace high flop, they're usually not check folding, so if I bet here I have to triple barrel, and my hand doesn't really have potential. I can't the best card on the turn would be a 10, giving me an open-ender, but yeah, I'm generally in really poor shape and not barreling the turn with much equity. And you might even be going for a flop check raise, or you might be going for a triple check call with ace king. So I'm just happy to check it down. If he has something like a 9 or pocket tens, then I might even win a showdown if I pick up a jack or a queen. Three betting my first hand in blind versus blind here. This is more risky at mid stakes than at small stakes, but it still works pretty well. The first hand at the table, people often their HUD stats haven't even loaded yet on you, and as a result they just give you credit. It's a little bit risky with people maybe recognizing me and knowing that I like to do that. But I feel, at small stakes it's very profitable to 3-bet a ton early on in the session, and at mid stakes it's still profitable but a little bit less. Not much going on at the moment. Whenever not much is going on, I usually look at these black boxes with recent hands played for big pots that went to showdown. Like at this table, there were two pots that went to showdown. Oh, there you go. I'm looking at them right now. There's always information out there. Even when you're four tabling, you're still missing on some information. Even when you try to pay attention, you just can't pick up on every single thing. Maybe some people can, but whenever you're in a dead stretch, always look for the information out there. It also keeps you sharp, because when you're on a dead stretch and you're not really paying attention too much and it's boring, then you might lose your focus. Here check call is the pre-flop raiser with pocket sixes here, because in the 3-bet pot on the ace high board where I had queen jack, he checked the flop, checked the turn, and then bet the river. So he probably had like a second pair type hand or a weak ace. So when he bets this board, I expect him to check back if he has an 8 or a hand like pocket 9s, pocket 10s. So it's like jack or nothing, and that allows me to check call, because his betting range must be polarized. And now here, he bets on the river and he bets $50. Now given that his flop betting range was polarized, like a jack or better, with a jack or better he'd bet again on the turn, so he can't have a jack. Because he bet the flop, he can't have an 8 or something, so when he bets the river here, he can't have two pair with an ace. It must be a one pair hand at best. Like ace queen or so. Ace king. I think if he picks up a flush draw, he barrels it on the turn. Same for king queen. He probably doesn't check back. So when he bets here, it could be a bluff and it might be good if I check call, but since his hand is ace queen or ace king at best, I can also just go for a check raise, because I can very credibly represent a hand like 8-9 suited, ace jack myself maybe, ace 8, ace deuce. And also, even if I don't necessarily rep that much, people are generally very afraid to bluff catch with one pair hands against strong river aggression. Especially when you don't have a dynamic yet. Maybe if he recognizes me, he might call a little bit lighter. But in general, this is a very strong play. His range is capped, or is likely capped. Of course, I'm only assuming that he, this entire play is based off that 3-bet pot that we played before. I was just making an assumption about what he probably had there. A hand with showdown value that was playing it passively. Maybe he just had air and he checked it down and then decided to bluff the river or something, and he would actually have bet something like ace-8 on the flop here. But even then he might fold a hand like ace-8 when I check raise the river. But yeah, he tank folded, so he probably had a hand like ace-king there. I'm just taking some bet size notes there. It's always valuable to write down bet sizes when you know what they likely had, or when you actually know what they had. Because if you ever see them use a different bet size, then you've just spotted a bet size tell that you can exploit. Here I see bet pretty small in a 3-bet pot, because the board is really dry, there's no real need to see bet any larger. If he has air, it's really hard for him to play back. And if he wants to float, he's gonna get barreled quite a bit on the turn. In fact, when I see bet that small and people do call, they very often, because of the small bet, you do get an increased floating frequency, and as a result your second barrel has more fold equity, so I will very often fire a second barrel after making a smaller bet on one street. If he folds to the flop, that's fine, and then I'll take a note that he plays fit or fold to the small bet, and if he calls it, then that's also fine because I can barrel. Now against a really dishonest player, I might check here because he could maybe be double floating, or he might value shove a hand like king queen anyway when check to, but he could fold a hand like pocket nines when I jam. So if I stack his calling range anyway by checking, then it's better to check because that gives him an opportunity to bluff. But he seems pretty straightforward, though. When I was sitting down, I saw a player 4-bet bluff him. The regular opened from middle position, then he 3-bet from the big blind, and then the regular 4-bet bluffed. So I'm guessing that he is a little bit aggro. Otherwise, that other player wouldn't have 4-bet bluffed him when he gets 3-bet after opening from early position. From the stats he seems pretty tight, but from that one observation it leads me to believe that he might be more aggro than his stats make him seem right now. Big hand on table 2. Always check out all the big pots and take notes about them. Here player 4-bet against 3-bet against under the gun from the small blind, and a call the 4-bet out of position with pocket aces. That's fine if you think he's bluffing and you want to trap, but I think you should just shove there to cooler ace king, because if the guy has ace king and you slow play aces, the guy will usually miss the flop, and as a result you end up not stacking him. But if you do slow play it and flop top set, then why on earth would you check raise all in on the turn? That's just completely pointless. If he does have ace king, you stack him on the river anyway, and if he's bluffing, then you just fold out his air. Reasonable squeeze spot here. This is the same player that was sitting here heads up, and that player seemed somewhat straightforward. Yeah, he check raised bluffed that monotone board, but then check folded the turn. And yeah, my guess is that he's not the type to flat premiums with the intention of getting a squeeze out of me. And also this player is the player that slow played the aces against the under the gun 4-bet. So I think when he 4-bets here, I can discount a couple of premiums from his range, and as a result the EV of 5-bet bluff goes up. And I think a guy that, that's the type to slow play aces there and check raise the turn is also somewhat prone to 4-bet bluffing against the squeeze. So it just felt like a good spot to squeeze the ace-4 and then jam it when shoved. And the guy actually had ace-queen, which is, if he knew that I observed the pocket aces hand there, I think the ace-queen play there is really good. And otherwise it's probably a bit too light to get it in if you're readless. But against me it was obviously a great play. So yeah, if he did it based on a read, hats off to him. And otherwise, he probably has some leaks, just like that aces hand that didn't seem very good. And the latter is probably more likely. And here, just rewind the video quickly. It's against that same player. Here I raised king 7 and decide to check fold this flop because he seems to be a little bit dishonest, and I don't think I have much fold equity on this board. Even against his air, I just don't get many folds, so I have to barrel, and he's probably not folding any ace and might bluff raise turn, stuff like that. So I just decide to check fold, and he checks back. And by checking, I kind of wrap showdown value because a lot of people just see bet ace high boards all the time, unless they have a hand like second pair. So I decided to take a stab on the turn, just hoping to fall out his air, and he called, and then went check on the river, and he actually had the flop nut flush draw with top pair, which he also didn't value bet on the river. So I have two very big reads there. The first being that he actually checks when he has a hand, which I already pegged him orange for dishonest, but especially after this is like a super confirmation. He's just a very dishonest player. But he is also incapable of value betting thin. And dishonest players are usually the players that are capable of bluffing off stacks. And if he's not doing that for thin value, then it means that he's putting in a lot of money with a polarized range, and that allows you to bluff catch them. So whenever you have a player like that at your table, be very cautious and be ready to play big pots against him. And that's also generally not a player type you want to be out of position against. This is an interesting hand. This guy might be a fish, might be a regular. Actually, he's probably a regular. Yeah, he probably raised to 12 pre-flop, 38 c-bet. Yeah, so he had a full stack. Okay, so he's c-betting the ace king queen board 4-way. A lot of people are very straightforward and will just check fold here. But this is a really good spot for him to fire multiple barrels, because he can wrap all the sets, top 2, stuff like that. So it's still fine for him to c-bet, and then if he gets one caller, he can just barrel. So I think it's a good spot for him to c-bet bluff if he has missed it. Then likely fish called, and then probably a regular overcalled. Now the regular overcalling, I think if you already have a bet and a call, if you have the nuts here, you should just be check raising, because there's a fish in there who you can just stack. And also this guy will probably just shut down with his bluffs, and he might even check a hand like ace 10 for pot control on the turn or something. So yeah, I think if he has a monster, he will very often check raise the flop, or at least a certain percentage of the time. And his calling range in this case is mostly suited aces for just top pair, and maybe someone like king jack suited. And a7, the fish could have any pair, queen 10, queen jack, king 10, king 9, any ace. And against that range, a7 is in pretty reasonable shape. And if I check raise here into 3 people, I will get immense amounts of credit. I think if you're in his shoes with a hand like ace queen, you should probably fall to a check raise from you know, maybe not a check raise coming from me, but in general, I think most people will fold a hand like ace queen there. And this guy will also fold all his one pair hands. And getting it in against the fish ain't even that bad. It's only a little bit of money, and against his ace x range, I probably have like 40% equity or so. So with a lot of dead money in there, I think this is a good spot to turn a hand into a bluff. With check overcalling, I'm rarely gonna win the hand, I think. But yeah, check raising seems good here. The fish calls, so the fish probably has an ace. And then he actually folds for $80 more on this guy back shove. This guy definitely had jack 10 there. And the fact that the fish called my check raise but then folded for the last $80, that's worth taking a note. Because it means that he hates folding in general, because he didn't fold with my check raise. But he's probably playing for his entire bankroll, so he is afraid of busting. Otherwise he would have just called it off for the last 80. So yeah, when you're playing against a fish that you know is playing for his roll and he's afraid of going broke, fish generally don't fold, but they will fold if getting stacked means that they have to stop playing. So in a single raised pot, when it goes check 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 check, don't bluff them on the river, because he will call with any pair. But if you can triple barrel him and shove the river, you will get a ton of folds. So those are good fish to play really aggressive against, but not bluff him on only one or two streets. Here the small stack on the button raised pretty small, less than 2.5x, and also with these stack sizes the value of a 1 per hand goes up. So I'm not folding much when he raises the button. And I check called the flop because he's likely c-betting all his air, and from his stats he seemed to be raising pretty wide on the button. And I can credibly use an out of position float line there, which I did now, and he folded river. Yeah, 3-betting here because he's min-raising. Min-raises are usually weak. Even if they call the 3-bet, you can just c-bet the flop. Flop second pair in the 3-bet pot, so no need to bluff. Then he bets really small on the turn. This sucks a little bit because they very often do this for value, or they just auto bet but the bet size equals their hand strength, so it could be a hand like pocket 7s, pocket 10s. And I'm kinda considering turning the hand into a bluff here on the river. But if he folds, I don't get to see what he actually had when he bet 20 on the turn, and don't get to see what he actually called my 3-bet out of position with, so I decide to check it back to get the guaranteed showdown. And now I have a valuable read. I think I have a pretty aggro image against What's Up Dog. He has seen me 3-betting a lot, maybe I've been 3-betting him a lot, maybe I've squeezed him, I'm not sure what I did, but I'm pretty sure that I had an aggro image against him, so I decided to fast play the ace king here, hoping that he can 5-bet bluff me or something. And here with the set, the guy, when I check raised the wet board, actually 3-bet and then folded to a shove. And that's also something you should definitely note, because not many people are capable of bluff 3-betting on a board where you have such a potentially wide all-in shoving range. Here I almost 3-bet bluffed the king queen because it's normally not strong enough to call on the cutoff, I feel. But I looked at my notes on him and had suspicion that he likes bluff catching. And king queen flops big cards. King queen is a big card hand. It flops big pairs that can make value bets. And value bets go up in EV against players that bluff catch. So because I have that note that he likes bluff catching, I decided to flat the king queen with the intention of getting some thin value post flop. Pretty small raise here. I think a lot of people will just auto 3-bet the king jack, but against smaller raises you get better pot odds on calling and you win less money when your 3-bet works. And also because the effective stack to pot ratio is deeper, you'll get less folds when you 3-bet. So compared to the larger raise, the EV of a call goes up and the EV of a 3-bet goes down. So the adjustment that you should be making to those smaller raises is to 3-bet less and call more. So it's definitely a flat with the king jack suited. And also there's a fish in the big blind, so it's definitely a flat there. I decided to bet out on the turn here because most people don't check back an ace there. So I can just both value bet and yeah, it's a thin value bet. So he calls me on the turn and then he bets the river when check to. Now this can only be for value, this can only be pocket eights or or an ace that he checked back on the flop. And if he's capable of checking back, I think it's mostly an ace that he checked back on the flop. And a call here is probably slightly negative EV. But I want to know if he actually checks back an ace on the flop. So I just ended up calling there for information, knowing that he would mostly have an ace. But I want to know, is he checking back his weak ace? Is he checking back a strong ace? Or is he maybe capable of doing that as a bluff? Like, could it be a flush draw, for example? If he can check back an ace, he might be able to check back a flush draw and then take that line as well. So there's valuable information in that call. Yeah, maybe since I don't actually grind on full tilt, I should have folded. But on iPoker, I would definitely have called there because I might be playing him more often. here with the ace-10. This is that fish that bet 20 into 60 on the turn in a 3-bet pot with the king-10 when I had ace-4. So I have that bet size telling him that the small bet was a bluff. And here on the river, it could be a bluff, but he might be bluffing with the best hand, you know, with pocket threes or something with no heart. And maybe he's betting that small with you know, with the queen or something as a protection, as a blocker bet, or maybe with a really small flush and he might fold it to a raise. So I think raising is better than calling there, but I should definitely not fold because I have to read that small bets are weak. Oh, and on table 3, I'll just rewind quickly. I raised under the gun against big blind and I checked back the flop because I felt, you know, I'm not gonna fall out pocket pairs, and you know, he can have a queen and I have good equity, so I'll just check back. And then I turn an ace, and I think if I bet there he's just folding pocket 8, so I don't get any value out of them. And he could still have a queen going for a check raise. He might go for a check raise bluff on the ace, which I'm probably folding to, so I think it's better to check back, and that also wraps a hand like pocket 8s for myself, you know, which I could check back on the flop and then not bet any on the ace. So he might try to bluff me on the river. And also he might you know, pay off a river bet while he would have check folded to a turn bet with certain hands. And I didn't raise him on the river because he could still have a queen or a flush. Here I called a c-bet on the flop, which is pretty standard. He checks the turn. Now I can either try to check it down or double barrel, and most regulars, most straightforward regulars, if they check the turn, they will never go for a double check call. They usually go for a check call, check fold, or a check fold on the turn. I don't really know if he is straightforward yet, but over the small sample he seems to be folding to quite a bit of c-bets, and he's also, you know, he's a player that, yeah, he did check raise the monotone board in heads up, but it was heads up, and he didn't follow through with it on the turn. So, you know, on the turn his play was straightforward again. So I decided to just go for the double barrel. And if I do get called down, then I have a read that you know, that he doesn't fold in those spots, and I can adjust accordingly. And he ended up calling me down with king 10. So it's good to know that he doesn't fold those hands on the river. Betting on the large side here with the ace-8 because there are flush draws out there. You know, my kicker is about flipping against his ace-x range, but he can have flush draws on top of that, so I'm still a favorite against his calling range. If there's no flush draw, then you're only flipping against his calling range. With a hand like ace-7, you can't even really value bet the turn anymore. Yeah, you can bet like half pot, so he still calls with the queen, but you can't bomb it. I think if I had a hand like ace-6 on that table, I'd probably bet half pot on the turn, because my equity just isn't good enough against his calling range if I bet large. So I need to get value from queens as well in order to value bet there. Oh, I actually misread the action. I assumed that I c-bet because it was a fish, but apparently he is the preflop raiser. Oh no, he limp called. Yeah, he limp called. I should just have c-bet there. I probably yeah, well, was distracted from playing a couple of other hands and just saw a flop and me being in the big blinds. So I'm usually the pre-flop caller there and just kind of automatically checked. Okay. Again, I'm not in any interesting spots, so I just search for a couple of recent hands to take notes about. Now, if he c-bets here, because we've seen him check back the ace-jack on the ace-high board, I'm just gonna check call. Or I think I should be check calling. I'll probably check call. Can't really remember what I did. Here I can both 3-bet and call. But this is the player that I had that note on. This is the same player that I called with the king-queen. No, actually, it's a different player. Oh, I actually remember at the time thinking that this was the same player as this player. So I called thinking that I would get earlier here I called with king queen against his early position raise because I had a note that he might be a bluff catcher, so I can get value with the king queen, and I thought it was the same player, which is why I called here as well with king queen. And yeah, here I folded pocket trees to the c-bet, but I should probably just have check called or check raised. Here this fish makes a small donk bet. I don't think this small donk bet is king jack or ace jack, it just doesn't feel that strong. But it's probably not a bluff either. It could be a draw, it could be a weaker jack. So I'm just gonna raise for value slash protection here. Yeah, I make it, don't make it too large because I don't want to fold a hand like a7. Here I didn't take a stab on the flop with my open-ender because we've seen him go for the check call with, or he checked back that ace on the ace high flop, so there's a reasonable chance I get check called there. I'd rather take the free card. And if the turn is an ace and he has some sort of underpair or something, he might bluff at it. I have good implied odds on the ace. Now he c-bets here. This would be a very good spot to bluff raise, but my hand has decent equity. I can play more streets, so I opted just to call. And normally this board is really drawy, so if you have a strong hand here, you should generally be raising. But because I have that read on him that from that ace high check back, I think this is somewhat often a bluff. With like a draw that he picked up himself or something, or I think it's just better to call to keep his range wide and allow him to fire the third bet. If he has a hand like ace jack, he might even fold to a turn raise. Well, if I just call, he probably bets again on the river. And now this river raise, I'm not really sure of, because if I discount some of his value hands from his turn betting range, then his range is more air and draw heavy as a result. And air is folding to a raise anyway, but one of the draws just got there, the flush. However, his bet size on the river was really small, and most people, when they are just bluffing with the draw, but suddenly they river the nuts, they tend to make a larger bet. So I was considering just calling, because it might be a flush and it's hard to get called by worse. But I could discount the flush because of the river bet size, so I opted to still make the value raise, even though it's somewhat thin and hard to get called. Maybe I should have raised even smaller, like a min raiser, like a 2.2x. Here, since I have been I've shown down a hand where I checked the flop against this player with air, I think. Maybe it was another player. I'm pretty sure I did it at least once against him, where I showed down a flop check with air. It was a good spot to now barrel with my gut shot. I will very often get called by ace high on the flop, but when I barrel I will get him to fold that, and I can credibly barrel because I've shown the check with air on the flop. And now he raises on the turn. I think if he has someone like a boat or so, most people just call again. But if he thinks that I probably have something, then why would he slow play? When he risks the board making a four straight or something. It is somewhat reasonable to shove over it, but because I thought he would give my barrels a little bit credit here, his raise is more likely for value, so I ended up giving up here. But he has also, I think he raised a flop c-bet, or maybe that happens after this. He has raised a flop c-bet, and now he's raising a double barrel here, so his fold to c-bet is 25%. He could just be on the heater, but it's also very possible that he's I'm taking that note, that he's possibly dishonest post-flop. Yeah, there's the note about the flop raise c, but that was also blind versus blind. And now he didn't raise the flop, but he raised the turn. He only hit the flop 1 in 3 times. A little bit more often, but you can't go raise flops at a high frequency and call flops and raise turn at a high frequency without be bluffing in one of those lines. So he's either on the heater or he's getting very out of line. And he's also the player that got 4-bet bluffed at the start of the session by another regular, which is an indication that he probably 3-bets quite aggressive himself. So I already had the suspicion that at the time he was 18 VPIP, but that he was actually going to be more aggressive and more out of line. So everything is kind of summing up here. Now here the fish 3-bets, I could just shove, but I thought the fish are sometimes bad enough to call a 4-bet and leave very little money behind, and then check fold when they miss. And that would be very good for me if he does that, so I opted to just pot instead of putting him in, hoping that that's what was gonna happen. And yeah, when you hit the flop, I'll obviously prefer getting the money in pre-flop, but but 2 out of 3 times you'll miss, and then it's kind of nice if you can get him to check fold when he's probably even priced in to call with his air. It is this player on whom I had a note that that he likes bluff catching, so I called with king queen to make pairs and then value bet thin. Now I'm calling with kings to value bet not thin. If I 3-bet, he might just fold pre-flop, but by calling I get in some post-flop spots. I also keep a... Oh, this guy's actually sitting out. Well, I give a regular an opportunity to squeeze, stuff like that. So it's a good player to slow play against. Here I end up calling. I'll just pause on my notes. Alright, so yeah, he has already... Oh, this is the player that made that 3-bet bluff when I flopped the set. He bet 3-bet flop and I folded to the shove. So I know he's capable of bluffing. And if he's capable of bluffing, I can value 4-bet here, but I'd rather the EV of a trap goes up if he's capable of running big bluffs. So because of that note, I ended up calling him here, hoping that he'd go on some sort of bluff post flop. So I'm just gonna call the flop, pretty standard. Now here on the turn, I think if I call twice here, he's not gonna bluff shove the river with pure air, because I look so much like I have an ace. And if he's not gonna bluff the river, then I'd rather shove now, because if he has a flush draw, I'd rather have him either call the turn or fold his equity if he's not gonna bluff river. And if he has an ace, he'll call the shove anyway. So most people, when they 3-bet bluff with a weak ace and they flop the ace, they don't double barrel. They either check flop or check turn. So when he double barrels, he either has a strong ace for value or he's bluffing. And if he's not gonna bluff the river, then it's better to shove turn to for protection against flush draws. Might have been better to call because he has made it bet 3-bet bluff on that wet board. But I just look so much like I'm not folding the river when I call twice there. Here I got my c-bet, got check raised on the flop, and he bombs the turn. So I'm just gonna let him have it there. I'm completely readless. And there I kind of see the power of running big bluffs when your image is still clean. It's just so hard. People don't have reason to not give you credit yet, so all your bluffs go up in EV and all your value bets go down in EV. Here on the river, it's a little bit of an awkward spot because of his stack size. I think because I just shoved over him on the turn in the 3-bet pot, and he hasn't rebought, he could be yeah, not a regular, even though his stats seem kinda like those of a regular. He might just be playing only one table or two tables, and only playing in weekends or something. And those players are usually more prone to tilt. And since I've just won a big pot off of him, I thought it was better to just go for the entire stack and shove, hoping that he'd hero call with an ace. But maybe his calling frequency is more than twice as high if I bet half a stack size here, $90, 95. And also if I bet 95, maybe he check raises all in as a bluff. So yeah, which is best, shoving or like 95? I think 110 or so is bad. I have to bet either smallish, to milk him, price him in, possibly give him some room to shove, or I just have to jam there. I'm gonna speed up the video a little bit more. Here, I raise ace-8 off on the button, get called by a fish, and he donks bets the flop. And then he jams the turn. Now, if he had a hand like ace-jack, he would not be overbet jamming on the king turn. So this is either a flush or a hand that wants me to fold. And if he has a flush, why would he just jam all in on the turn? He can just bet like 50 or 40 and then shove river. So I think it's more likely a hand that wants me to fold than it is a flush. And in that case, pot odds don't even matter because I think I'm actually favored against his range. So yeah, even though I'm readless on him, I just his line didn't make sense, so I called him. And he actually had queen 8. Here the fish in heads up, he donk bet on a board where he's very unlikely to hit the flop. So I mean the donk bet just looks like he's randomly stabbing with overs. So he didn't seem like the type to triple barrel. He hasn't been bluffing very often when I checked my bluff catchers to him. So I think if I float him, will very often shut down. So floating there is probably better than raising. And on the ace, there's no real reason to bet, because I can still get him off his air on the river. And I don't think he will bluff river, but there's a chance that he actually hit the ace on the turn. So by checking back the turn, I get to see if he bets the river or not. And when he checks, he doesn't have an ace, and I can make a very efficient bluff. And when he bets, then I know that I save myself a bet by not bluffing on the turn, when he very likely has an ace. But yeah, he rivered the queen and called it off. That can happen when you do that. Here on table 6, trying to find the beginning of that. There we go. Alright, here, actually, I thought I was the preflop raiser and I was c-betting because I've been playing heads up against the fish, and I was mostly the preflop raiser, so actually donk bet unintentionally there, and I got raised. And when people raise your donk bet on boards such try, it's very often a bluff. So I decided to just call. And then when he checks back the turn, it's a card that he can represent because the flush hit, but he didn't bet. So it's actually somewhat likely that he has some sort of showdown value, but not a very strong hand. So that's why I underbet the river there to get called by that, whatever showdown value he had, like a turn 5 or something. And that's exactly what he had, ace 5. This hand, I c-bet 1/3 pot on the flop, which is my standard on these really dry boards. Pick up showdown value, so there's no need to bet again on the turn. And now he bets on the river. Now this could be an out of position float. It could be pocket 3s or pocket 4s being turned into a bluff. But it's also very often just ace-x value betting. And even though a rep's super narrow if I raise here, when people raise in my spot, they're generally not bluff raising, and an unknown usually doesn't bluff catch there. Just like when I got check raised on that ace queen board, when I had ace 4, and then the guy bombed the turn and just folded because he had no read. And since this guy just sat down, he's completely readless on me. He should have no reason to assume that I'm bluffing when I raise here. So this is really a spot where you can just buy the pot by making a giant raise and just fold out every one pair hand in his range. Here I check called pocket jacks as the preflop raiser on the flop. I raise from under the gun and get called by middle position. Things are pretty standard check call on the flop. And most weak-tied regulars, if they bluff at it on the flop, they will only bluff twice and give up on the river. So I think it's when he double barrels, a lot of people will fold there because they're afraid that if he has air that he's gonna bluff on the river. And because of that, a lot of people actually only bet twice and don't bluff the river, because when the guy does call the turn, he will usually call twice. So it's kind of maybe it's a thing that changes with time, that it waves back and forth. I don't know, but right now it just feels like that people mostly bet twice and check back river. They don't really bluff there. So I was planning to just check call twice and check fold river. And also, if you're in his shoes, you should pretty much always fire the third barrel, because most people take the line that I was gonna take there: check call, check fold. Right, that was the end of the video. If I missed any hands, let me know. Or if you have questions about any of the hands I didn't miss, post them, and I'll happily answer. This was GrindCore for Deuces Cracked.